She thought it was finally love, but the proposal came wrapped in lies, and this time saying yes could cost her everything. This is Agatha Raisin and the proposal she should have refused. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. The drizzle had the look of damp lace drifting down over Carsely, soft enough to flatten the bunting outside the village hall, but not fierce enough to call off a celebration. Inside, the air shimmered with steam, perfume, and the comforting aggression of women guarding sausage rolls. Agatha Raisin, in her best black dress and leopard print scarf, felt the glow of triumph warming her more than the tepid wine. The Mercester Pet Fair, her public relations miracle, had raised thousands for the animal shelter, and Carsely's gossips for once were purring rather than scratching. She caught sight of herself in the hall's grimy mirror and thought, not without satisfaction, that she didn't look half bad for her age, whatever that happened to be today. Mrs. Blocksby drifted over with her usual gentle smile. "A splendid evening, Mrs. Raisin. You must be proud." Agatha waved her cigarette like a sceptre. "Proud? I'm astonished. The Cotswolds usually prefer failure. It gives them something to pity." "Even pity can be a kindness," Mrs. Blocksby said mildly. "Kindness," muttered Agatha, "is highly overrated." But her eyes softened. She liked the vicar's wife's serenity. It made her feel almost civilized. At that moment, the microphone squealed and Doris Simpson, Carsely's most indefatigable gossip, announced that a distinguished guest wished to propose a toast. Heads turned as if expecting the Queen, or at least someone who'd been on the telly. He appeared, tall, silver-haired, and disturbingly well-tailored. Martin Weller. The name meant nothing to Agatha, but his smile carried enough wattage to light Mercester. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, voice rich as clotted cream, "may I raise a glass to the woman who's shown us that enterprise still thrives in our beloved countryside, Mrs. Agatha Raisin." Applause broke like a wave. Agatha flushed, torn between pleasure and suspicion. She'd met enough charmers to know the dangerous ones never look dangerous. "Very kind," she said, trying to sound modest and failing. "Not at all," he replied, eyes locking on hers. "Your campaign was inspired. Perhaps when you're free we might discuss future collaborations. Over champagne?" The hall tittered. Doris Simpson's jaw dropped, which pleased Agatha immensely. Later at the Red Lion, Agatha sat with Mrs. Blocksby, Bill Wong and Roy Silver, who had descended from London in a cloud of aftershave and complaint. "Darling, that man's charisma should be illegal," Roy declared. "He winked at you, in public. I thought Cotswold men only wink at tractors." "Nonsense," said Agatha, lighting another cigarette. "He's a businessman. They all flirt. It's like shaking hands." "Flirting with you, perhaps," Bill teased. Agatha shot him a look. "Watch it, Wong, or I'll send Hodge to shed on your sofa." Mrs. Blocksby sipped her lemonade. "He seems confident." "Arrogant," corrected Roy. "Probably sells timeshares in Mallorca." But Agatha's thoughts drifted to the curve of Martin's smile. There had been confidence there, yes, but also something persuasive, almost intoxicating. She remembered the faint scent of expensive cologne and felt a flutter she refused to name. The pub windows misted with rain. Charles Frayth had begged off, claiming a dinner with people who bathe in champagne, which sounded like his usual excuse for avoiding anything honest. Agatha told herself she didn't miss him. "He said he's starting some sort of Cotswold lifestyle agency," she mentioned casually. "Helping local businesses market themselves. Seems sensible." Bill looked doubtful. "Never heard of him before tonight. Where's he based?" "Evesham, I think. Rented one of those cottages near the river." Roy rolled his eyes. "Darling, anyone can rent a cottage. Conmen love exposed beams." Agatha bristled. "Honestly, you're all so suspicious. Perhaps he just appreciates my talents." "Which ones?" Roy murmured. Agatha ignored him, though her cheeks warmed. Next morning, Carsely looked washed clean by the rain. Hodge sat on the windowsill, tail flicking, as Agatha drafted letters on her typewriter. The rhythmic clack steadied her nerves. Outside, she could hear Doris Simpson's bicycle bell, an omen of gossip incoming. Moments later, the doorbell rang. "If that's another parish collection," Agatha muttered, lighting her first cigarette of the day, "I'll pretend to be dead." But it was Martin Weller, rain-spattered yet immaculate. He carried a bouquet, lilies, which Agatha found faintly funereal but flattering nonetheless. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "I wanted to thank you properly for last night. You were marvellous." Agatha's vanity purred. "Come in, then. Hodge, behave." He stepped inside, surveying her cottage with a connoisseur's eye. Charming. Real character. "Yes, it leaks with charm in winter," she said dryly. He laughed, and the sound filled the small kitchen pleasantly. Over instant coffee, she had meant to offer tea but forgot, Martin spoke of partnerships, brand identity, heritage tourism. The words glittered like coins. "With your connections and my expertise, we could build something remarkable," he said. "A proper Cotswold agency. You'd be perfect. Front-facing, media-savvy, utterly fearless." Agatha's heart skipped. Perfect, media-savvy, fearless, all her favourite adjectives. Still, she pretended indifference. "I'm semi-retired, you know." "Nonsense. A woman like you doesn't retire. She reinvents." Flattery wrapped in confidence, a dangerous package. When he rose to leave, he added lightly, "Why don't we discuss it further, over champagne at the Mercester Arms? Say, tomorrow evening?" Agatha heard herself agreeing. That afternoon, Mrs. Bloxby arrived bearing a tin of shortbread and concern. "I met your Mr. Weller at the post office," she said. "He seems polished." "And what's wrong with polish?" "Nothing at all. Only I couldn't find anyone who knows him. He says he's new to the district." Agatha shrugged. "So was I once, and look how adored I am now." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "Yes, though you did frighten the parish council for a time." Agatha laughed, but uneasily. After the vicar's wife left, she found herself staring at the lilies until the smell turned heavy, cloying. She carried them out to the bin, telling herself it was the pollen. Evening fell with another drizzle. The Red Lion buzzed with talk of Agatha's admirer. Doris Simpson was already holding court by the bar. "Mark my words, Doris said. Men that smooth are either married or bankrupt." "Or both," replied the landlord, polishing glasses. Agatha entered in her camel-coloured trench coat, chin lifted. The chatter dipped, then surged back with twice the energy. She ordered a gin and tonic and pretended not to hear her name woven through the gossip. Roy appeared, flamboyant scarf trailing. "You're famous again, darling. Half the village thinks you're engaged." "Let them. It'll give them something new to chew on." "Chew carefully," Roy warned. "Men who appear from nowhere usually vanish the same way, taking your wallet with them." Agatha's eyes narrowed. "You're just jealous because he didn't wink at you." "He did, actually," Roy said cheerfully, "but I winked back harder." Agatha burst out laughing, tension slipping away for a moment. Back home, the cottage felt too quiet. She poured a second gin, turned on the wireless, and listened to the weather forecast. More rain. Hodge leapt onto her lap, purring like an old engine. "You don't approve, do you?" she said, scratching his ears. Hodge yawned, unimpressed. Agatha studied the card Martin had left with his number embossed in silver. Martin Weller, consultant. No address. That struck her as slightly odd, the first tiny clue, though she didn't yet know it. She placed it beside the telephone and told herself she'd check him out properly tomorrow. Yet when the phone rang, she snatched it up before the first ring finished. "Agatha Raisin," she said brightly. "Just me," came Bill Wong's steady voice. "Thought I'd see if you were all right. That fellow, something about him doesn't sit right." "You're all mother hens tonight," Agatha snapped, though without heat. "Honestly, Bill, you sound like Mrs. Bloxby." "She asked me to call." "Of course she did," Agatha sighed. "You're all conspiring to save me from romance. We're trying to save you from paperwork. Men like that leave trails of it." Agatha laughed, promised she'd be careful, and hung up. Yet long after the line clicked dead, she sat staring at the silver card, its surface catching the lamplight like a wink. Outside, Carsely settled into drizzle and darkness. The village, satisfied with its new scandal, slept contentedly. Agatha locked the door, pulled her dressing gown tight, and glanced once more at the card. "A private consultation," she murmured. "Well, why not?" Hodge stretched luxuriously on the armchair, tail flicking like punctuation. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "A woman's allowed some excitement." The cat blinked, unimpressed, and turned away. Agatha lit one last cigarette, exhaling a ribbon of smoke that curled towards the ceiling. Outside, the rain tapped gently on the window pane, as if Carsely itself were whispering a warning she was far too flattered to hear. The next morning dawned grey and smug, the sort of Cotswold day that looked down its nose at umbrellas. Agatha Raisin was already pacing the kitchen, cigarette in hand, Hodge eyeing her reproachfully from the table as she rummaged for her car keys. "Don't start," she said to the cat. "It's business, not pleasure. Well, mostly business." Hodge yawned. He had heard variations of this before and evidently expected disaster. Agatha had agreed to meet Martin Weller at his temporary base of operations, a phrase that sounded reassuringly professional when he'd said it over the telephone the night before. She had repeated it to herself ever since, as if repetition might make it true. By the time she reached Evesham, the drizzle had become a proper sulk. Martin's cottage stood at the edge of town, ivy-choked and faintly grand. A gleaming silver BMW sat in the gravel drive, the sort of car that made Agatha's small hatchback look like a mobility aid. He opened the door before she could knock. "Mrs. Raisin? How delightful. Do come in. I've chilled champagne." "At 11 in the morning?" "The French do it all the time," he said smoothly. "The French are drunk half the time," she muttered, stepping inside. The cottage interior smelled of polish and expensive aftershave. Magazines lay artfully on the coffee table, Country Life and The Spectator, covers uncreased as if newly purchased for effect. Agatha took it all in with the wary admiration of a woman who suspected the furniture might be rented. Martin poured champagne into crystal flutes. "To Enterprise," he said, raising his glass. Agatha sipped cautiously. "So, tell me again about this boutique agency." "A lifestyle consultancy," he corrected, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "You and I could corner the market. Every weary Londoner wants the Cotswold dream. Honey-stone cottages, homemade chutney, the illusion of peace. We'll sell them that dream." Agatha frowned. "I'm not flogging chutney." "Not chutney, my dear lady. Ambience. You bring credibility. Carsely's golden girl. I bring contacts and capital." It was nonsense, but flattering nonsense. She could almost see the brochures. Agatha Raisin Associates. Country charm with a London edge. He leaned closer, cologne wafting. "I can see us at launches in Mercester, Evesham, perhaps even London. Your name in print again." Agatha's heart gave a small, ridiculous leap. She had missed that. Her name, people listening. "Well," she said, trying for sceptical but landing on coquettish, "I suppose it has possibilities." By the time Roy Silver arrived from London that afternoon, Agatha was radiant. He found her in the kitchen, feeding Hodge and humming something that might have been romantic or possibly indigestion. "You're alarmingly cheerful," Roy said, shedding his rain-spotted coat. "What's the occasion? Won the lottery? Or finally poisoned the WI committee?" Agatha poured him coffee, instant naturally. "Neither. I'm considering a partnership." Roy froze mid-sip. "Good grief, with whom? You and Mrs. Bloxby opening a moral guidance bureau." "Martin Weller," she said airily. "You met him at the dinner." "The slick one with hair that looked ironed?" "He's charming," Agatha snapped. "So are foxes until they're in your hen house." Roy perched on a stool. "What exactly is this partnership?" "A lifestyle agency. We'd promote Cotswold living, small-scale events, property consulting, media connections. He says I've the perfect public profile." Roy's eyebrows rose. "He's good. Has he asked for money yet?" "Don't be cynical. I'm being experienced. There's a faint whiff of con artist cologne in the air. And darling, it's not mine." Agatha bristled. "You've been in London too long. You think everyone in the provinces is a fool." "Not everyone," said Roy. "Just the ones writing cheques to strangers." She slammed her cup down. "I haven't written anything, yet." "Then promise me you won't. At least not until you've checked him out." Agatha waved a dismissive hand. "Bill Wong already tried that speech. You all sound like my insurance policy." "And you sound like the next headline in the Mercester Gazette," Roy said lightly. "Local woman duped by debonair dreamer." Despite herself, she laughed. "You're insufferable, but accurate." That evening Martin telephoned. Agatha's answering machine caught the first few words. Smooth, confident, impossible to ignore. "Agatha, my dear, tomorrow at noon. I've drafted our proposal. Bring your instincts and a good pen." She replayed the message twice, telling herself she was only checking details. The next day dawned crisp and falsely bright. Agatha dressed with military care. Navy suit, pearls, a spritz of perfume she hadn't used since her last misguided date. Hodge observed from the armchair, expression eloquent with disapproval. "Don't start," she told him again. "It's business." He flicked his tail, unconvinced. Martin greeted her at the cottage door, all charm and polish. Papers lay spread across the table, glossy mock-ups of letterheads, a draft brochure with her name printed in elegant italics. "You've been busy," she said, impressed despite herself. "I'm a man who acts, not talks," he replied. "Here, just a small preliminary check to cover the registration. Your contribution would make us partners from the outset." Agatha hesitated. "How small?" 2,000. A token, really. "You'll make it back before summer's out." The figure was large enough to sting her pride, but small enough to seem plausible. She thought of Roy's warnings, of Mrs. Bloxby's gentle concern, of Bill's raised eyebrow. Then she thought of how satisfying it would be to prove them all wrong. "All right," she said briskly. "I'll write it now." As she bent over her checkbook, Martin's gaze lingered on her with professional appreciation. "You have remarkable initiative, Mrs. Raisin. Not many women of experience would seize opportunity so quickly." She stiffened slightly at the word experience, but forced a smile. "I've always believed in taking charge," he beamed. "Precisely why this will work." When she returned to Carsely, the village lay quiet under a thin evening mist. She parked by her gate, feeling half elated, half foolish. Roy was waiting in her kitchen, feet up on a chair, reading her Country Living. "You gave him money, didn't you?" "A small amount," she said sharply. "You make it sound sordid." "It is sordid," Roy replied, "if he runs off to Marbella with it." "Oh, do shut up, Roy," he leaned forward. "Did you at least get his business address?" "Of course. He's renting that cottage in Evesham." "And before that?" Agatha frowned. "He said something about consulting abroad, Monaco or maybe Malta." "Both tax havens," Roy said darkly. "I knew it. You've bought shares in thin air." Agatha lit a cigarette. "You're an appalling friend." "And you," Roy said, "are a magnificent fool. But at least you're our fool." That made her laugh in spite of herself. "Pour us both a gin, then. I'll toast my financial ruin." Later, after Roy had gone and the laughter faded, Agatha sat at the kitchen table staring at the cheque stub. The number glared back, accusatory. "Partnership," she muttered. "That's what he called it." Hodge leapt onto the table, settling squarely atop the paperwork. "Move, cat." He didn't. Instead, he sniffed the folder where Martin's proposal lay and hissed softly. "Oh, stop being dramatic," said Agatha, though unease prickled at her neck. She gathered the papers, slid them into a drawer, and poured herself another gin. The rain had started again, tapping on the window pane like cautious applause. Somewhere in the night, a car engine hummed briefly, then faded. Perhaps in Evesham, perhaps further. Agatha told herself she was imagining it. Before bed, she rang Mrs. Bloxby to assure her everything was perfectly respectable. The vicar's wife listened kindly and said, "I'm sure it is, my dear. Just remember, not every charming stranger is an angel in disguise." "You all make him sound like a criminal," Agatha said crossly. "No, no, only that good men rarely arrive bearing champagne before noon." After hanging up, Agatha stood by the window, watching the drizzle thicken. Hodge wound round her legs, tail brushing her dressing gown. "They're all jealous," she told him. "That's the truth." The cat blinked, unimpressed. She sighed, set her glass down, and switched off the lamp. The cottage fell silent except for the slow tick of the clock and the faint rustle of rain. In the darkness, the drawer where she'd placed Martin's papers creaked as the wood expanded in the damp. It sounded almost like a sigh. "Partnership," Agatha murmured again, half amused, half defiant. What could possibly go wrong? Hodge stretched, claws catching the fabric of her skirt, and gave a final, warning hiss. Carsely woke that morning as only an English village could, with drizzle, denial, and gossip. The rain, thin as muslin, dusted the honeystone cottages and pooled in the hollows of the green. The magnolia tree by the vicarage had begun to bloom, each pale flower trembling as though blushing at the rumours it heard. The rumour in question was spectacular. Agatha Raisin, it was said, was engaged again. Doris Simpson was first to report it, having seen Agatha and Martin Weller walking down the Evesham High Street, his umbrella gallantly sheltering her, his hand brushing hers in a way Doris described as positively continental. By mid-morning, the tale had migrated to the Red Lion, where old Mr. Jones insisted Martin had been seen kneeling, outside Agatha's gate. By lunchtime, even Mrs. Bloxby had heard, though she refused to repeat it. Engaged was rather a strong word, she felt, though she admitted privately that Agatha had been glowing of late, in a way that suggested either romance or deceitful skincare. Agatha herself was in no mood for interference. She sat at her kitchen table in a cloud of cigarette smoke, addressing envelopes for what she grandly called the Cotswold Lifestyle Agency. Hodge, sprawled on a chair, flicked his tail disapprovingly. "Oh, hush," said Agatha. "You've never understood ambition. Or men." At that moment, the phone rang. "Darling Aggie," sang Roy Silver down the line, "I've just heard. Is it true you're marrying that man who dresses like a banker on holiday?" "Don't be ridiculous," Agatha snapped. "It's business. Strictly business." "Then why did Mrs. Blocksby tell me you've started wearing lipstick before noon?" Agatha ground out her cigarette. "Because I'm professional, not because I'm besotted." "Same thing in your case," Roy said cheerfully. "Anyway, be careful. I've known men who've proposed joint ventures and vanished faster than my overdraft." "You're all jealous," Agatha said, and hung up before he could retort. Later that day, Bill Wong arrived with the expression of a man about to say something unwelcome but necessary. "You'll be wanting coffee," Agatha said, already defensive. "Tea, actually," he said mildly, taking the offered mug. "Agatha, I've been asking around about your Mr. Weller." She bristled. "My Mr. Weller? He's not my anything, he's a colleague." "Right," said Bill. "Well, his name's come up before. He had a partner a few years back, a woman named Harriet Crane. They ran some sort of wellness retreat in Devon." "How very enterprising," Agatha said. "She died," Bill said quietly. "Unclear circumstances. The inquest returned a verdict of misadventure, but there were whispers, pills, money troubles. He left soon after." For a moment, Agatha felt a chill, then rallied. "That proves nothing. You policemen see ghosts everywhere." "We see patterns," Bill said gently. "Just be careful, Agatha. Please." She forced a laugh. "You're all determined to ruin my good mood. Next you'll tell me he's got a harem in Morocco." "He's got something," Bill said, standing. "I just don't know what yet." When he'd gone, Agatha stared at the magnolia outside, its blooms pearled with rain. They looked fragile, like promises. "Rubbish," she muttered, lighting another cigarette. "A man can't be blamed because his business partner overdosed. Happens all the time." Hodge sneezed delicately, unimpressed. 2 days later came the Women's Institute Spring Flower Show, the village's most competitive social battlefield. The hall smelled of lilies, damp coats, and unspoken rivalries. Mrs. Blocksby presided at the entry table, radiating calm amidst the chaos of chrysanthemums and ambition. Agatha swept in wearing a bright scarf and her best trench coat, chin high. Martin followed carrying a bouquet of roses for the organizer, which he presented to Mrs. Blocksby with a bow so exaggerated it nearly qualified as acrobatics. "What a charming gesture," murmured Mrs. Blocksby, though she looked faintly alarmed. "Always happy to honour the pillars of the community," Martin said. Agatha's cheeks pinked with pride. Around them, whispers started like the rustling of leaves. Doris Simpson was in the corner, ostentatiously polishing her jam jars for judging, her ears practically twitching. "You'll win first prize for gossip, Doris," Agatha muttered as she passed. "And you'll win for gallantry," Doris said sweetly. "That man of yours could charm the Queen's corgis." Agatha pretended not to hear, but her step quickened. The judging began. Martin hovered, offering compliments to each competitor. "Exquisite petals, Mrs. Petty. Remarkable arrangement, Miss Hardwick. Such taste, Mrs. Comberford. A symphony in begonias." By the time he finished, half the village women were blushing, and the other half plotting his downfall. Agatha was both delighted and mortified. His gallantry had a theatrical gleam, sincere enough to impress, false enough to embarrass. When he caught her eye, he winked again, and she found herself half melting, half furious. "Show off," she muttered. Charles Fraith appeared at her elbow. "Good heavens, Aggie, is that your latest conquest or an audition for The Bachelor?" "It's business, Charles." "Of course it is. So were the Crusades, but they ended badly too." She scowled. "You're impossible." "And you," said Charles, surveying Martin with amused detachment, "are about to be fleeced. Still, you'll look marvellous doing it." Before she could retort, Martin rejoined her, radiating charm. "Darling, you were splendid. Shall we celebrate later? A bottle at the Arms, perhaps?" "Darling?" Charles repeated softly, eyebrows raised. Agatha ignored him. "Yes, lovely idea," she said. daring Charles to mock her further. That evening, back in Carsely, the rain returned. Agatha, flushed from a few too many glasses of wine, decided to tidy her papers before bed. The cheque stub from her investment glared up at her like a reproach. She pushed it aside and instead noticed something new on the hall table, a cream-coloured envelope, hand-delivered. The handwriting was precise, feminine, and unfamiliar. She opened it. "Dear Mrs. Raisin, forgive this intrusion. I urgently need to speak with you about Mr. Weller. Please do not mention this letter to him. I shall call tomorrow. Yours sincerely, Lydia Hales." Agatha frowned. Lydia Hales. The name meant nothing. Perhaps another jealous ex, or unpaid supplier. Or worse, a journalist. The next morning, as promised, a nervous woman appeared at the gate. Late 30s, neat suit, trembling hands. "Mrs. Raisin, I'm Lydia Hales. May I come in?" Agatha led her to the kitchen. Hodge watched from the counter, fur bristling. Lydia perched on the edge of her chair like a guilty conscience. "I was Mr. Weller's business partner," she began. Or tried to be. "We started a consultancy in Bath. Well Solutions, it was called. He said we'd be helping clients with lifestyle transformations. In the end, the only thing transformed was my savings account." "You mean he cheated you?" Lydia nodded, eyes downcast. "I lent him £10,000. He promised investors, brochures, everything. Then he vanished. I heard he'd moved to Evesham. When I saw your name in the local paper, Agatha Raisin to launch new Cotswold agency, I feared you might be next." Agatha felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "You must be mistaken. He's already deposited funds, shown me proposals. He always does," Lydia said, "until the cheques bounce." For a moment, only the rain spoke, drumming steadily on the window. Hodge hissed once, low and certain. Agatha drew herself up. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Hales, but I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself." "Please," Lydia whispered, standing. "Be careful. He'll ruin you if you're not." When she had gone, Agatha poured herself a large gin, hands trembling. She wanted to dismiss the woman as hysterical, but her story had an awful ring of truth. She called Martin immediately. His answering machine clicked on. "Martin, it's Agatha. Do call me. We need to talk about a visitor." She hung up, realizing how accusatory it sounded, and cursed under her breath. Hodge leapt into her lap, claws catching her skirt. She stroked him absently, staring into the rain-blurred garden. "She's jealous," Agatha said aloud, trying to convince herself. "That's all. Some bitter ex trying to stir trouble." But even as she said it, she remembered Bill's quiet warning, unclear circumstances. Outside, the magnolia blossoms swayed in the drizzle, white petals falling one by one like slow, silent confessions. Hodge gave a faint, warning growl. "Oh, don't you start again," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. She lit a cigarette, watching the smoke curl up and mingle with the steam of the kettle. The magnolias outside glowed faintly in the rain, beautiful and faintly mournful. Agatha told herself she'd confront Martin tomorrow, politely, firmly, without fuss, and then she stubbed out her cigarette, poured another gin, and decided she might do it after the weekend instead. The Cotswolds woke to a restless kind of sunshine, the watery sort that promised summer but delivered gossip instead. Carsely's lanes gleamed after a night's rain, and Agatha Raisin stood by her kitchen window, watching the steam rise from the hedgerows like a sigh. She had not slept well. Lydia Hales's visit had lingered in her dreams, turning Martin's charming smile into something thinner, more calculating. Still, pride was a hard habit to break. She had spent the morning telling herself Lydia was either mad, jealous, or both. "People exaggerate," Agatha said aloud, lighting her first cigarette, "especially women with bad haircuts." Hodge, on the windowsill, blinked as though unconvinced. The phone rang. It was Mrs. Bloxby, sounding unusually tentative. "My dear, I only wondered if you were all right." "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" "No reason," Mrs. Bloxby said, the words stretching like elastic. "Only that Mrs. Simpson told the postmistress she'd seen Mr. Weller at the Red Lion, having what looked like a rather serious conversation with a man in a leather jacket." "It's the Cotswolds, not the mafia," Agatha snapped. "He was probably ordering crisps." There was a soft chuckle. "I do worry, Agatha. He's quite the showman." "He's successful," Agatha corrected, "and confidence is not a crime." "No," Mrs. Bloxby agreed, "but deceit is." Agatha thanked her, promised she'd be cautious, and hung up with a sigh. Everyone seemed determined to save her from herself. She poured another cup of coffee and tried to work, but her mind kept circling back to Lydia's pale face and trembling hands. By 11, she'd decided to confront her. Lydia's bedsit above the chemist's in Mercester looked as though it had been furnished by regret. The curtains sagged, the carpet bore an air of surrender, and the kettle took 10 minutes to boil. Lydia herself answered the door, clutching a mug like a talisman. "I didn't expect you to come," she said, eyes widening. "Well, I don't appreciate people implying I'm a fool," said Agatha briskly, stepping inside. "I like facts, not whispers." "Then you should hear mine," Lydia said. She explained how Martin had persuaded her to invest in a wellness retreat on the Devon coast, detox weekends for stressed executives. It had sounded marvellous, all sea views and aromatherapy. He'd shown her brochures, a property lease, even a provisional booking list. Then he'd vanished, leaving her bankrupt and humiliated. Agatha listened, arms folded, willing herself to stay sceptical. Lydia's voice trembled, her fingers twisted the hem of her cardigan. Too emotional, Agatha decided. Unreliable. "Why tell me all this?" she demanded. "Because you remind me of me before he ruined me," Lydia whispered. "I thought if I warned you I might stop him." "That's very noble," said Agatha, though she meant it as a challenge. Lydia looked up sharply. "You don't believe me?" "It's not that," Agatha said, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking sign on the wall. "It's just that women with your temperament tend to dramatize. Perhaps he disappointed you romantically. That doesn't make him a crook." The colour rose in Lydia's cheeks. "He never wanted me, only my money." Agatha gave her a thin smile. "Well, you gave it, didn't you?" The cruelty of it hung between them. Lydia turned away, shoulders shaking. Agatha's chest tightened with a flicker of guilt, which she quickly smothered under irritation. "Look," she said more gently, "if there's evidence, I'll consider it. But until then, I'll thank you not to spread stories." Lydia turned back, face pale again. "Just don't go to that dinner," she said. "You'll regret it if you do." "What dinner?" "He told me he's planning an engagement dinner for you. He always escalates things when he's about to disappear. He loves a finale." Agatha laughed. "An engagement dinner? Really, you do have an imagination." "He'll use it to impress new investors. You'll be his advertisement." "That'll be the day," Agatha said, crushing her cigarette in the saucer. But as she drove back through the winding lanes, the laughter felt hollow. That evening the drizzle returned, soft as gossip. Agatha stopped at the Red Lion, craving company and perhaps a little validation. The pub smelled of wood smoke and chips. Doris Simpson was at the bar recounting how Mrs. Petty's begonias had been disqualified from the flower show for suspicious symmetry. "Agatha," Doris called, "we were just talking about your big event." "What event?" "Your engagement dinner, dear. Mr. Weller's been inviting everyone who's anyone. Said he wants to honour his future bride." The room erupted in cheerful laughter. Agatha froze. "Future bride?" "You dark horse," Doris beamed. "I always said you'd nab another one before Christmas." Agatha managed a smile, ordered a gin, and slid onto a stool. Her heart thumped unpleasantly. So Lydia hadn't been lying, at least, not about that. She was still composing a blistering remark when the door opened and Martin himself strolled in, all charm and aftershave. "My darling Agatha," he said, loud enough for half the pub to hear. "We were just talking about you." "I gathered," she said tightly. He kissed her cheek. "I hope you don't mind. I've taken the liberty of arranging a little soirée. Friday night. The Mercester Arms private dining room. Our first public celebration." "Celebration of what, exactly?" "Our partnership, of course," he said, eyes gleaming. "Though if people prefer to assume more romantic motives, who are we to correct them?" "We could try honesty," Agatha said. He laughed, brushing off her tone like lint. "You're delicious when you're sceptical." The villagers, rapt with curiosity, applauded. Agatha felt herself swept along by their enthusiasm, too flustered to object, too proud to retreat. Later, as the evening dwindled, she stepped outside to smoke. The air smelled of rain and frying oil. Across the square, under the dim glow of a street lamp, Martin was speaking to a man in a brown leather jacket. The stranger's face was sharp and hungry. His posture suggested impatience. Martin handed him a sealed envelope, glancing around first. The man nodded once, tucked it into his coat, and walked away into the mist. Agatha stood frozen, the cigarette trembling between her fingers. When Martin turned and spotted her, his smile reappeared as if by reflex. "Darling, there you are." "Who was that?" she asked. "Just business," he said smoothly. "You know how it is. Favours owed, promises kept." "Business at 10:30 in a pub car park?" "You're suspicious tonight. Perhaps it's the gin." He slipped an arm round her shoulders. "Come now, no frowns. Friday will be marvellous." "You mean the engagement dinner?" "Call it what you like. It's a chance to dazzle the locals and silence the gossips." She gave a dry laugh. "They'll never be silenced. They thrive on me." "Then we'll feed them a feast," he said, pressing her hand. Something in his tone, smooth, persuasive, made her shiver. Back home, the house was dark. Hodge sat by the door, tail twitching like a metronome of disapproval. "Don't you start," Agatha muttered, tossing her coat on a chair. She poured herself a small gin, then a slightly larger one. The reflection in the window looked stubborn, defiant, and to her irritation, uncertain. She replayed the image of the envelope, the leather-jacketed man, the way Martin's eyes darted before he'd handed it over. Nonsense, she told herself. Could have been anything. Invoices, a letter, a love note for all I know. But the unease wouldn't leave. She fetched Hodge's supper, the tin clinking against the bowl. He ate with the solemn absorption of a creature too wise for argument. "You'd tell me if I were being a fool, wouldn't you?" she asked. Hodge looked up, his whiskers glistening, and emitted a short, decisive hiss. "Traitor," she said, though her voice softened. The rain began again, whispering against the window panes like a warning too gentle to believe. Agatha stubbed out her cigarette and stood for a long moment in the stillness, the room lit only by the orange glow of the street lamp outside. Friday loomed ahead, promising answers, or humiliation, possibly both. "Fine," she muttered. "Let them whisper. I've survived worse dinners." Hodge stretched, tail curling round her ankles like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Agatha poured one last gin, muttering, "Well, if he's a crook, he's a very handsome one." And with that small act of defiance, or denial, she raised her glass to her own foolish heart. The evening began with drizzle, as all good Cotswold humiliations do. A fine mist turned the Mercester Arms car park into a mirror of puddles. Agatha Raisin, resplendent in a scarlet jacket that dared anyone to overlook her, stepped from her hatchback clutching a handbag large enough to conceal both vanity and regret. Inside, the private dining room gleamed with hired elegance, gilt mirrors, too many candles, and the faint smell of ambition. Martin Weller stood at the centre of it all, orchestrating chaos with the confidence of a man who mistook charm for competence. "Agatha, my star," he declared, kissing the air near her cheek. "Everything's ready. You'll be the belle of the ball tonight." "This isn't a ball," she said, removing her coat. "It's business." "Business can be romantic," he replied, pouring champagne with theatrical flourish. The first guests arrived, Mrs. Bloxby, drawn by goodwill rather than curiosity, Charles Fraith, curious rather than good, and Roy Silver, who appeared purely to support the narrative, whatever that meant. Bill Wong had come too on pretext of keeping the peace. The seating arrangement was a masterpiece of misunderstanding. Mrs. Bloxby was placed beside Charles, who found her serenity unnerving. Roy was next to the vicar's wife's lemon meringue. Agatha, naturally, was beside Martin, which would have been flattering had he not spent most of the first course addressing the room rather than her. "To partnerships," he said, raising his glass. "To success, vision, and, above all, trust." Agatha smiled tightly. The word trust had acquired a sinister ring lately. The soufflé arrived, trembling like a nervous debutante. Unfortunately, it collapsed under the weight of Martin's enthusiasm when he insisted on clapping the chef into the room. A deflated hush followed, broken only by Roy's stage whisper. "Symbolic, darling, absolutely symbolic." "Shut up," hissed Agatha. Charles, meanwhile, was locked in battle with the wine list. "This Merlot," he announced, "is an insult to the French language." "Drink your insult and be grateful," Agatha snapped. "Always am, dear heart," said Charles, raising his glass. As the meal limped along, Martin's stories began to fray. One moment he'd been in Monte Carlo negotiating spa contracts. The next he was a consultant in Madrid advising royalty on branding. Bill, quiet as ever, scribbled something in his notebook. Mrs. Bloxby leaned towards Agatha and whispered, "He's certainly travelled." "Yes," said Agatha, "though the question is why he never stays put." Before she could pursue the thought, Martin tapped his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Tonight we celebrate new beginnings, mine and Mrs. Raisin's." Applause rippled uncertainly. Agatha froze. "He's not—" she began, but she never finished. The door burst open and Lydia Hales stormed in, hair wet, eyes blazing. "You liar!" she cried. "You thief!" The room gasped. Doris Simpson, who had somehow secured an invitation, nearly dropped her fork. "Miss Hales," said Martin with brittle charm, "this is hardly the place. You took my money and hers," Lydia pointed at Agatha, trembling. "You ruin lives and call it business." "That's enough," said Bill, rising. "She's drunk," Martin said quickly. "Jealous, unstable, ask anyone." "Am I?" Lydia shouted. "Tell them about Devon, Martin. Tell them about Harriet Crane." The name dropped into the room like a stone. Agatha's breath caught. Harriet, the dead partner. "That's absurd," Martin snapped. "You need help, Lydia." "And you need prison," she spat, then fled. Silence held for a long moment, broken only by Roy murmuring, "Well, that killed the mood." Agatha stood, face white. What was she talking about? "Ignore her," Martin said. "She's unwell." "So were your other partners, apparently." His smile faltered. "You're not seriously listening to that nonsense." "Nonsense has a nasty habit of sounding true," she said. Charles leaned back, amused. "Well, this is more entertaining than the soufflé." "Not now, Charles," Bill said sharply. Martin straightened his tie. "I won't be insulted. This dinner is over." He strode out before anyone could stop him. The door banged behind him like a verdict. Agatha sank into her chair, trembling. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose that went well." "You do pick them," Roy murmured. Mrs. Bloxby touched her arm gently. "Come home, Agatha. There's nothing to gain here." But pride, as ever, refused to leave the table. An hour later, the drizzle had thickened into proper rain. The village green shimmered under street lamps as Agatha drove back to Carsely, fury and humiliation fighting for dominance. "Jealous, am I?" she muttered to herself. "We'll see who's jealous when—" She didn't know what came next because flashing blue lights interrupted her fantasy. A police car blocked the lane near the green. Bill's figure appeared in the beam of a torch. He raised a hand. "Agatha, pull over." Her stomach lurched. Oh, for heaven's sake, what now? She wound down the window. The rain smelt metallic. "You might want to stay in the car," Bill said softly. "It's Martin." "Martin? What about him?" Bill's face was grim. "He's dead. Found in his car near the oak by the green. Poisoned. Looks like gin and tonic laced with something nasty." Agatha stared. "Poisoned? You mean—" "Yes." "Oh, for God's sake," she said, voice breaking into disbelief. "He can't even leave quietly." "Afraid not." Bill hesitated. "Agatha, your name's come up. The cheque, the partnership. I have to ask where you were after he left the dinner." "At the Mercester Arms, being pitied by half the county," she snapped. "I've got witnesses and indigestion." Bill sighed. "I know, but the higher-ups will want statements." Agatha rubbed her temples. "I lend a man money, he dies, and I'm the villain. Typical." "It's not personal," Bill said gently, "but it's complicated. There's evidence he was planning something tonight." "Planning what? To humiliate me further?" "No," Bill said quietly. "To propose. To someone else." For once, Agatha had no reply. Later that night, she sat in her kitchen staring at the gin bottle on the counter. The clock ticked. Hodge padded across the floor and leapt onto her lap, warm and unbothered. "Propose to someone else," she repeated bitterly. "And I was worried about lipstick shades." She lit a cigarette, exhaled sharply. "Serves me right. Middle-aged fool chasing charm and promises," Hodge purred, stretching. "Don't gloat," she said. "You never liked him." She reached for her notebook, the old journalist instinct stirring. If Martin had been poisoned, someone had to have done it, and she refused to spend the next week being whispered about over pints at the Red Lion. The clues replayed in her mind. The envelope to the man in the leather jacket, the contradictions at dinner, Lydia's wild accusations. The pattern felt like a crossword she hadn't quite solved. The telephone rang, making her jump. She lifted the receiver. "Mrs. Raisin?" Bill's steady voice. "What now?" "We'll need you to come in tomorrow, and Agatha, don't talk to anyone tonight. The press are already sniffing around. They can sniff all they like. I'm not guilty of anything except poor taste. Still, Bill said, it might be wise to keep your head down. Not my style, Agatha said, hanging up. She stood by the window watching the rain blur the lights of Carsely. Somewhere out there a murderer was drinking tea, pretending to be normal, and once again she was at the centre of it all. Wonderful, she muttered. Another week, another corpse. Hodge yawned, unimpressed. Don't look at me like that, she said. You'd have fallen for him too, if he'd owned a fishmonger's. She stubbed out her cigarette and poured herself a cautious gin. The irony wasn't lost on her, but life, she decided, was too short for symbolism. Outside, the drizzle eased into silence. Inside, the clock ticked on, marking another night in Carsely, and another mistake Agatha Raisin was determined to turn into a mystery she could at least solve. Morning in Carsely arrived with drizzle and headlines. The Mercester Courier lay on Agatha Raisin's doorstep, half-soaked and wholly offensive. Its front page screamed, "Village romance ends in death." Beneath it, a smaller caption added the insult, "Local PR woman at centre of love triangle tragedy." Agatha snatched it up, glared at her own unflattering photograph, and muttered a word unfit for print. Hodge, curled by the Aga, opened one eye in judgment. "Don't you start," she said, lighting her first cigarette of the day. "I didn't kill him. I only lent him money, which in this village is practically the same thing." The telephone rang. She pounced, half hoping for Bill Wong's voice, half fearing it. "Aggie," cried Roy Silver. "Darling, your front-page news. You've never looked so notorious." "Roy, if you're ringing to offer sympathy, hang up before I drive to London and throttle you." "Don't be cross. I've already pitched the story to Cotswold Life. Death, Desire and Design, the Agatha Raisin affair." "You what?" "Relax, sweetie. I'll make you sound like a tragic heroine. Windswept, misunderstood, defiant in tweed." "Defiant in tweed? I'll be defiant in court if you don't stop." He tutted. "Honestly, you'd think I'd invented the corpse. I'm coming down tonight. We'll spin this, darling. Never waste a scandal." She slammed down the receiver, swore softly, and took another drag. The smoke curled into the damp air like resignation. By 10 o'clock, the village was buzzing louder than a WI beekeeping lecture. Doris Simpson had already been sighted outside the post office, retelling the story to 3 different audiences with increasing embroidery. "They say he was poisoned with her gin," Doris told Mrs. Bloxby and the greengrocers, and that she screamed "rot in hell" when the police arrived. "That's rather unlikely," said Mrs. Bloxby mildly. "Well, perhaps not screamed," Doris conceded, more of a firm tone. By lunchtime, the same story had acquired an engagement ring, 2 secret affairs, and a missing will. Mrs. Bloxby sighed, packed her shopping, and decided to pay Agatha a call. Agatha, when she arrived, was pacing the kitchen, chain-smoking furiously. "You'd think I'd dropped dead," she said. "Everyone's acting like I've murdered Prince Charming." "You must ignore them," said Mrs. Bloxby, setting down a basket of scones. "They'll move on once someone else commits a social sin. Doris's nephew is buying a motorbike. That should keep them busy by Thursday." Agatha managed to laugh. "You're wasted on the church. You should run MI5. "One must understand human nature to survive in either," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. Before Agatha could reply, there was a sharp knock at the door. Bill Wong stood there, looking tired but resolute. "Morning, ladies," he said. "Agatha, I need a word. You'd better sit down." She braced herself. "You found my fingerprints on the gin bottle, haven't you?" "No, but we found his wife." The room went still. Even Hodge paused mid-purr. "His what?" "Elaine Weller, lives in Bath. Says they've been separated for 2 years but never divorced. Claims he'd turned over a new leaf." Agatha snorted. "He turned over more leaves than a gardener. Did she know about Lydia?" "Not exactly," said Bill, "but she's willing to talk to you. Says she thinks you might understand him." "Understand him? I'd like to resurrect him and kill him again." "Be polite, Agatha," Mrs. Bloxby murmured. Bill nodded. "I'll drive you down. Less attention that way." "Attention," Agatha said darkly, "is all I seem to get these days." Bath glittered even under rain, smug with its Georgian perfection. Elaine Weller lived in a narrow terraced house on the outskirts, tasteful, expensive, and soulless. She opened the door herself, a tall woman with perfect posture and a face designed for public sympathy. "Mrs. Raisin," she said, voice smooth as cream. "Do come in. I was just making tea." The living room was immaculate, soft blues, no dust, and not a single sign of mourning. "You've taken this rather calmly," Agatha said before she could stop herself. Elaine smiled faintly. Martin and I had been apart for some time. He was restless, always reinventing himself. I suppose I'm not surprised it caught up with him. "He was reinventing himself with my money," said Agatha. "He had a talent for persuasion," Elaine agreed. "He persuaded me to forgive him more times than I can count." She poured tea with elegant precision. "He wrote to me a few weeks ago, said he wanted to make amends." "Did he mention blackmail?" Bill asked quietly. Elaine's hand hesitated just slightly. "Blackmail? No. Why?" "We found letters suggesting he was being threatened," said Bill. "Anonymous, typed, all on the same stationery." Agatha noticed the small writing desk by the window, neat stacks of paper and envelopes beside it. The watermark on the pad, faint but visible, read H & Sons Stationers, Bath. She frowned. "That watermark, and I've seen it before. Lydia's notebook had the same one." Bill made a note. Elaine's expression didn't change. "It's a common brand," she said coolly. "I'm sure half of Bath uses it." "Of course," said Bill, unconvinced. Agatha leaned back, studying her hostess. The woman's calmness was almost theatrical. Not grief, not shock. Performance. "You don't seem very broken up," she said bluntly. Elaine smiled. "I grieved for Martin years ago. This is only confirmation." Mrs. Bloxby, had she been there, would have kicked Agatha under the table. But Agatha pressed on. "You don't mind that your husband was romancing women for money?" "He was always romancing someone for something," Elaine said lightly. "It stopped mattering once I realized the performance wasn't personal." "Did you ever meet Lydia Hales?" "Only briefly. She came here once, begging for him to repay her. I told her the truth. She'd never see a penny." "And what did she say?" "That she hoped he'd rot. It appears she got her wish." Her tone was so placid it chilled the room. Bill rose. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Weller. We'll be in touch." Elaine smiled serenely. "I'll be here." Outside, rain fell with renewed enthusiasm. "Well," said Agatha as they reached the car, "she's lying." "About what?" "Everything. No one that calm has clean hands. She's rehearsed every word." Bill shrugged. "Maybe, but we can't arrest people for composure." "We should," said Agatha. "It's unnatural." Back in Carsely, Roy was waiting on her doorstep like a sequined vulture. "Darling, tell me everything. The widow, is she glamorous, tragic, villainous?" "All three," said Agatha. "Now get out of my way before I use you as a footnote." He followed her into the kitchen undeterred. "I've had photographers sniffing around the pub all morning. Doris gave them your childhood address, by the way." "Of course she did," said Agatha. "She probably charged them for directions." Roy perched on a stool. "Look, if we can't stop the gossip, we might as well manage it. A tasteful interview. Roy, if you finish that sentence, I'll drown you in gin." "Speaking of which," he said, eyeing the bottle on the counter, "perhaps we should toast your survival." "My survival," she said dryly, "depends on not drinking what killed him." The phone rang. Bill again. "Agatha," he said, "forensics confirmed it was digitalis, foxglove extract. And get this, it was in his tonic water, not the gin." "Foxglove," she repeated. "That's a gardener's poison. Lydia had those at her cottage." "So did half of Gloucestershire," Bill replied. "But here's what's interesting. The envelope he gave that man outside the Red Lion. It contained blank checks, all signed." Agatha's pulse quickened. "Blackmail payments?" "Or hush money," said Bill. "We're still tracing it." "Elaine's lying," she said again. "You mark my words." "Maybe, but she's clever, and she's got a solicitor already." "So have I," said Agatha. "Mine's retired, but he's still breathing, which is more than I can say for Martin." Bill sighed. "Try not to antagonize anyone for at least 24 hours. "Impossible," she said, and hung up. By dusk, the drizzle had become fog. The village green was blurred and beautiful, as if innocence could be painted back in. Agatha stood by the window, watching the lamplight shimmer through the mist. Hodge jumped onto the sill, tail flicking. "You'd have liked Bath," she said absently. Lots of posh cats, fewer morals. He yawned. She poured a small gin, ignoring the irony. Her reflection in the glass looked tired but sharp, not defeated yet. The day's chaos replayed itself. Elaine's perfect calm, Lydia's tremors, Bill's cautious sympathy, Roy's opportunism, Mrs. Bloxby's gentle wisdom, all orbiting the same question: who killed Martin Weller? The answer, she suspected, wasn't going to flatter anyone. She lit a cigarette, exhaling toward the fog. The smoke drifted up like a whispered confession. "The widow's lying," she told Hodge, "and I'm going to prove it." He gave a non-committal purr as though reminding her that proof rarely made anyone happier. "Oh, shut up," she said, stroking his fur. "I'm not doing it for happiness. I'm doing it for pride." Outside, the mist thickened, swallowing the street lamp's glow. Inside, Agatha Raisin, Carsely's favourite scandal, sat with her cat, her gin, and the faint, foolish thrill of being back on the scent. The next morning arrived grey and disagreeable, as though the weather itself had been reading the papers. Carsely's hedgerows sagged under rain, and the cottages wore their dampness like scandal. Inside hers, Agatha Raisin sat at the kitchen table, cigarette in hand, glaring at the telephone as if it might confess something. Hodge watched from the dresser, tail wrapped primly round his paws. He'd already had breakfast. His human, however, had only managed nicotine and irritation. The phone finally rang. "Agatha," said Bill Wong's calm voice, "we've confirmed it. Digitalist, foxglove extract. It came from Martin's herb garden." "How poetic," she said dryly. "Murdered by his own greenery." Forensics think the poison was added to his tonic after the gin. The dose was precise, not accidental. So someone wanted him dead, and they knew what they were doing. Exactly. And Agatha, you're not to interfere. "I never interfere," she said, stubbing out her cigarette. "You always interfere." "Then why bother warning me?" He sighed. "Because you never listen." Agatha smiled faintly. "Right you are, Bill. I'll stay quietly at home." She hung up, found her car keys, and reached for her coat. Martin's cottage near Evesham looked smaller than she remembered, or perhaps her pride had shrunk since her last visit. The garden, however, was flourishing indecently, foxgloves standing tall and purple against the drizzle. A police tape fluttered in the wind, half-heartedly attempting authority. A figure in a waterproof was tending the borders just beyond it. Agatha called out, "You there? You're not supposed to touch anything." The man straightened, revealing a weathered face and cheerful grin. "I'm the gardener, love. Been told to tidy the place a bit. Can't have it looking like a crime scene forever." "It is a crime scene," said Agatha, stepping closer. "Or hadn't you heard?" "Oh, I've heard. Whole village has. I was just cutting back the foxgloves. Pretty, but poisonous. Always said so to Mr. Weller." Agatha eyed the trimmed stalks on the path. "When did you last see them standing?" "Day after he died," said the man. "Someone had already cut 'em by then. Clean, like with a knife. Not me, mind. I only finished the job." Agatha's mind sharpened. "You're sure they were already gone?" "Certain, and whoever did it wore small boots. Left neat prints in the mud right by the fence." "Small boots?" "Aye, not his size, I'll tell you that. He was a big man." "Did you mention this to the police?" "Didn't think it mattered. Thought they'd trampled enough mud of their own." She took a slow breath. Smaller boots. Lydia Hales came instantly to mind. Nervous, bird-like, with tiny feet and trembling hands. "Thank you," she said. "You've been most helpful." "No trouble, love," said the gardener. "You're that lady from the papers, aren't you? The one he—" "Yes," Agatha interrupted briskly. "That one." She turned back toward her car, face burning despite the cold drizzle. When she returned to Carsely, Charles Fraith's vintage convertible was already parked outside her cottage, gleaming insolently in the rain. Inside, Charles lounged on her sofa like a cat in borrowed sunlight, nursing a cup of coffee and an expression of amused concern. "Bill told me not to let you out of sight," he said, "so naturally I came straight here." "You're not my keeper," she said, hanging up her coat. "No, but it's a diverting job. You're enjoying this far too much." "Of course I am. Your front-page scandal again. I wouldn't miss it." She poured herself a gin, ignoring the clock. "You might show a touch of sympathy." "I'd need to practice first." Agatha glared. "I visited his cottage. The gardener says someone cut the foxgloves after Martin died, and there were boot prints, small ones." "Ah, the plot thickens," said Charles, reclining further. Do we have a suspect? Lydia, said Agatha. She's disappeared. How convenient. Maybe she's off pruning more murder weapons. Don't be glib. The police can't find her, and that's never a good sign. Charles smiled. You realize, of course, that you're now investigating under the pretext of clearing your own name. How very Agatha of you. Someone has to. Bill's too cautious, and Mrs. Bloxby thinks forgiveness solves everything. Lydia's mixed up in this. I can feel it. You always feel it. Sometimes you're even right. Agatha ignored the jab. She fetched her notebook and began scribbling. Foxgloves cut after death. Small boots. Missing car keys. She frowned. What is it? Charles asked. Martin's car keys. They never turned up. Police said they weren't in his pocket or the car. So whoever killed him might have used them. Exactly. Which means he didn't drive himself to the green. Someone moved him. Charles gave a low whistle. That's rather sinister for a love story. It wasn't love, Agatha said sharply. It was business. And pride, he added softly. She looked away. Maybe. Later that afternoon, they visited the Red Lion, where Doris Simpson was mid-performance. I'm telling you, she said to a captivated audience, they'll find her in Spain, or somewhere with cocktails. You can't trust women who cry that much. Morning, Doris, said Agatha, sweeping in. Still rehearsing for your one-woman show? Doris blinked innocently. Oh, Mrs. Raisin, I was just saying what a shame it all is. Were you indeed? Then perhaps you'd say it more quietly next time. Charles smirked into his pint. You can't blame people for talking, Doris added, unrepentant. We don't often get murders with proper romance attached. Yes, I'm thrilled to be your entertainment, said Agatha. Do let me know when tickets go on sale. Doris sniffed. You'd sell out faster than I would. True, said Agatha. I have better material. She dragged Charles to a corner table. You're marvellous, he said. You should charge admission. Shut up and listen. Doris may be a vulture, but gossip travels faster than fact here. Someone must have seen Lydia leave the village. And you think Doris's rumour mill will deliver enlightenment? No, said Agatha, but it's a start. At that moment, the landlord appeared with their drinks. Funny you mention it, Mrs. Raisin. That nervous lady, Lydia was it, came by early yesterday morning, asked for directions to the train station. Which one? Evesham, he said. Looked like she'd been crying all night. Agatha's mind raced. Did she say where she was headed? No, but she had a suitcase. Small green one, could barely lift it. Charles leaned back. So she's fled. Guilty conscience. Or fear, said Agatha. If she found out who really killed Martin, she might be running from them. Or from you, Charles said lightly. She glared. You can leave any time, you know. And miss Act 2? Never. That evening, Agatha sat at her desk, trying to make sense of her notes. The clues jostled without aligning. Foxgloves, boot prints, missing keys. Lydia's tears, Elaine's composure. Her pride prickled. For all her bravado, she felt oddly responsible, as though her vanity had invited tragedy in for tea. A knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bloxby holding a casserole in concern. I thought you might not have eaten, she said. You thought right. Mrs. Bloxby set the dish on the table. Bill says you've been investigating again. Someone has to, Agatha said. I can't let the police blunder about while the village paints me as Lady Macbeth in mascara. Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. You do thrive under pressure, Agatha, but be careful. Sometimes the truth costs more than gossip. Agatha softened. You sound like a fortune cookie. I prefer scripture, but the message is the same. After she left, Agatha poured a small gin, partly in gratitude, partly in rebellion. Hodge leapt onto her lap, settling with a sigh that spoke of feline disapproval. Oh, hush, she said. I'm not giving up. She replayed the gardener's words in her mind. Cut after death. Someone had returned to that cottage. Not Bill. He was meticulous. Not Lydia. Too frightened, though perhaps desperate. Elaine Weller, maybe. The calm widow with the polished smile. She'd had motive and poise enough to do anything. But then, where were the missing keys? Her cigarette burned to ash as she stared at the curling smoke. Keys, she murmured. Car keys. Whoever moved him had them. A sudden image flashed, Martin handing the sealed envelope to the man outside the Red Lion. What if that envelope hadn't been money at all, but keys? A payoff, a delivery. Hodge stirred, unimpressed. "Don't look at me like that. I'm onto something." He yawned, which Agatha chose to interpret as encouragement. She fetched her coat again. Outside, the drizzle had thickened to fine rain. The street smelled of wet earth and impatience. As she passed the vicarage, the church bell tolled softly, a reminder, she thought, that Carsely's peace was always temporary. She paused under the street lamp, lighting a cigarette despite the wind. Smoke curled upward, mixing with the rain. Her humiliation had begun this story. Her stubbornness would end it. Somewhere among the gossip and grief, a truth waited, sharp, inconvenient, and probably unflattering. She flicked ash into the puddle, muttering, "If pride's a sin, I'll die an expert." Hodge's face appeared briefly in the window of her cottage as she turned back. Inside, warmth waited, and with it, a cat, unimpressed by human folly. For now, that was comfort enough. Morning arrived with sunshine so sudden it felt suspicious. Agatha Raisin distrusted good weather the way other people distrusted tacksmen. She sat by the kitchen window, cigarette in hand, watching Carsely look wholesome and undeservedly peaceful. Hodge snored on the windowsill. The radio muttered the headlines, still circling Martin Weller's death like vultures on a power line. Agatha switched it off and muttered, "If they say, 'Village femme fatale' once more, I'll sue for defamation and bad taste." The telephone rang. "Aggie," cried Roy Silver, "pack away the scowl, darling. I've solved everything." "The murder?" "No, your image. We're hosting a little tea party. Carsely gets Agatha Raisin, the misunderstood woman of business. The press adore redemption arcs." "Roy, you couldn't organise a sandwich, let alone salvation." "Don't be horrid. I've booked the tea room in Mercester. 2:00. Wear something forgiving. Tweed says trustworthy." "You're insane. And you're famous. See you there." He hung up before she could argue. Agatha groaned. Hodge opened one eye in pity. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "It's either Roy's circus or another day of gossip." The Mercester tea rooms had been freshly painted in shades of innocence. Lace curtains fluttered, and waitresses moved like startled lambs. Roy Silver stood in the centre, radiating showmanship. His suit was lilac. "Darling," he exclaimed as Agatha entered, "you look divine, rural yet repentant." "I look like a woman attending her own public flogging," she said. "Perfect. The tabloids love contrition." The tables were filled with local reporters and the odd villager. Doris Simpson was there, naturally, sipping tea with the righteous air of a woman ready to misquote. "Smile," hissed Roy. "You're rebranding." Agatha forced something resembling cheer. Cameras clicked. "Mrs. Raisin," said a journalist, "how well did you know the late Mr. Weller?" "Hardly at all," she said briskly. "But he was your business partner?" "In a manner of speaking." "And you invested how much?" "A modest sum." £5,000, according to his records. Agatha froze. "Did I say modest? I meant foolish." Laughter rippled. Roy beamed nervously. Another reporter leaned forward. "There's talk the cheque was forged." "Nonsense," Agatha snapped. "I wrote it myself." "So you're confirming it was your signature?" "Of course." She stopped, remembering Bill's warning the night before. The reporter smiled like a cat at cream. "But the police claim the signature was inconsistent," Roy interjected, fluttering his hands. "What Aggie means is—" "Don't Aggie me," she barked. "My signature's fine." "And you've nothing to hide?" "Only my temper." Roy's eyes pleaded for mercy. "Tea break," he announced shrilly. The crowd scattered, gossip already humming. Agatha turned on him. "You said this would help. Public sympathy, darling. They love a fiery woman. They love watching me drown. Then tread water gracefully." She grabbed her handbag. "I'm leaving before I throttle someone. Smile for the local press first. Over my dead body." "Already covered," Roy called after her. Outside, the sunshine had soured. Agatha drove straight to the police station, seething. Bill Wong met her in the car park, clipboard under one arm. "You look cheerful," he said mildly. "I've just been publicly disemboweled by journalists. Why didn't you tell me about the cheque?" "I did," said Bill. "You told me not to meddle in your affairs." "That's before it became everyone's affair." "The forensics team found signs of forgery. Someone traced your signature. We think the cheque was altered after you wrote it." "Altered how?" "Your handwriting stops halfway through. Different pen pressure after that. Amount changed from 2 to 5,000. Agatha stared. "So he did cheat me?" Or someone else did. We've uncovered some curious transfers. Lydia Hales, Elaine Weller, and a charity account called Helping Hands, all linked to Martin's name. Charity begins at home, apparently, she said grimly. We're tracing the money now, but be careful, Agatha. Lydia's still missing, and whoever forged that check might be nervous. Nervous people make mistakes, she said. So do angry ones, Bill replied. By evening, the village had regained its usual self-righteous calm. Carsely's gossip network ran smoother than any postal system. Mrs. Bloxby had heard about the tea debacle before Agatha even reached her cottage. When she arrived, Mrs. Bloxby was waiting with a plate of biscuits and the expression of a woman braced for battle. "My dear, you mustn't let Roy organise anything again," she said kindly. "He meant well," said Agatha, "but if I hear the word rebranding again, I'll rebrand him as missing." "People only gossip because they care," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "They care about entertainment, not truth." "Sometimes both coincide," said the vicar's wife. Agatha lit a cigarette. "I'm starting to see why nuns take vows of silence." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "You'd last 10 minutes. "Rubbish," said Agatha. 15 at least." Hodge wandered in, brushed past both women and jumped onto the armchair, purring as if to diffuse the tension. Mrs. Bloxby glanced at him fondly. "You see, even Hodge knows things will calm down. He's a cat, not a moral philosopher. Sometimes they're the same thing." Agatha almost laughed. Almost. Later, alone, she poured herself a gin and stared at the check copy Bill had given her. The forgery was subtle, a faint change in slant where her pen had supposedly continued. A perfect little lie. Her mind circled the facts. Forged check, charity accounts, Lydia's disappearance, Elaine's calm. It was a pattern, half-drawn. The answering machine clicked. The voice that followed was breathless, panicked female. "Agatha, it's Lydia. Don't tell anyone I called. They're watching me. Please, meet me at midnight, by the old gate on Carsely Green, before they find me." Then a sharp click. Agatha froze, heart hammering. She replayed it twice. The fear in Lydia's voice was real, not rehearsed, not dramatic. "Before they find me," she repeated softly. Hodge leapt onto the table, knocking her cigarette pack to the floor. She stroked his head absently. "What do you think, eh? Trap or truth?" He blinked. "You're right," she muttered. "Probably both." She fetched her coat and checked her torch. Midnight was hours away, but she already felt the chill of it. "If I end up murdered, you'd better mourn me properly," she told Hodge. He meowed once, which she took for reluctant agreement. Agatha poured one last gin, raised it in a mock toast to her reflection, and said, "To pride, stupidity, and curiosity, the holy trinity of trouble." She downed it in one go. Outside, the evening mist gathered, curling round the hedgerows like secrets too heavy for air. Somewhere beyond the village green, a frightened woman was waiting, or perhaps luring. Either way, Agatha Raisin was going to find out. The fog came in soft and low, as if the night were trying to hide its own secrets. Carsely Green lay beneath it, silvered and silent except for the distant toll of the church clock. Agatha Raisin stood under the lich gate, collar turned up, cigarette glowing like a small act of defiance. Midnight, and no Lydia. "Typical," Agatha muttered, flicking ash onto the damp stone. "She begs for help, then leaves me loitering like a fool in a detective serial." Hodge had been left at home, sulking after supper, though she almost wished she'd brought him for company. Even the village cats were sensibly indoors. Somewhere in the mist an owl hooted. The sound set her teeth on edge. Then, faint footsteps, hesitant, uneven, approached from the direction of the vicarage lane. Agatha straightened, heart giving a traitorous leap. Lydia? The shape that emerged was taller, firmer. Not Lydia. Elaine Weller stepped out of the fog, face pale and strained, her composure finally cracked. "You!" Agatha exclaimed. "What are you doing here?" Elaine's hands trembled as she drew closer. "I needed to speak to you before anyone else does." "About what? You've already told the police all your little half-truths." Elaine shook her head. "No, Agatha, not everything. I couldn't before. Martin, he—" "What about him?" "He was blackmailing me," she said in a low, shaking voice, "over forged charity donations. He found the papers. He said he'd go to the police unless I helped him again." Agatha's temper flared despite herself. "So you did know about that Helping Hands nonsense?" "It wasn't supposed to be fraud," Elaine whispered. It began as a tax dodge. He made me sign things, told me it was bookkeeping. And you believed him? You did too once. Agatha flushed. That was different. I was gullible, not criminal. Elaine's laugh was bitter. He ruined everything he touched. I thought when he died I'd finally be free. Agatha frowned. Then why the confession now? What's changed? Someone's been following me, Elaine said. I think Lydia's alive, and she knows more than I do. She sent you that message tonight, but it wasn't her idea. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Then whose? Before Elaine could answer, headlights cut through the fog, blinding them both. A car's engine revved, then stopped abruptly at the edge of the green. Oh, wonderful, said Agatha. I do love an audience. Elaine turned sharply, fear etched across her face. They found me! Don't be ridiculous, said Agatha. It's probably Bill. But when she peered through the mist, the figure by the car was already fleeing. A shadow darted between the gravestones, fast and silent. Agatha's instincts kicked in. Stay here, she barked and tore after it, her heels immediately sinking into the wet grass. Damn these shoes, she muttered, half running, half sliding through the fog. The figure ahead stumbled, recovered, then vanished behind the yew trees. Stop! Agatha shouted, not meaning it. She had no plan for what she'd do if they did. Behind her, the church bell struck 12 again, as if mocking her lateness. Bill Wong's car screeched onto the lane moments later, Charles Fraith beside him, looking half amused and half frozen in his overcoat. She's what? Said Charles, staring out the window. Chasing someone, said Bill grimly. Because of course she is. They followed the sound of rustling until Agatha emerged from the fog, hair wild, mud on her knees, looking furious and magnificent. Lost them, she said shortly. Them? Asked Bill. I couldn't see properly. Could have been a man or a small horse for all I know. You're supposed to not chase suspects, Bill said. You're supposed to catch them before I have to, she retorted. Charles handed her his handkerchief. You've outdone yourself this time, Aggie. Positively feral. Oh, shut up, Charles. Where's Elaine? But before anyone could answer, a new voice cut through the mist. Agatha! It was Lydia Hales. She stumbled into the circle of headlights, face pale and streaked with tears, clutching something in her hand, a bottle of tonic water. Lydia! Cried Agatha. Where the devil have you been? I tried to tell you, Lydia gasped. I wanted to warn you. Warn me about what? Elaine. Lydia pointed back towards the lich gate. She killed him. She... A scream sliced the air, Elaine's voice, followed by the crash of something metallic. Bill sprinted toward the sound. Agatha, cursing her shoes again, followed, with Charles reluctantly behind. They reached the gate just as Elaine staggered out, her expression twisted with horror. She's mad, Elaine whispered. She thinks I poisoned him. Did you? Asked Agatha. Elaine didn't answer. Lydia appeared behind her, bottle still in hand. She's lying. She made me... Put that down, Bill ordered, stepping forward. But Lydia's hysteria was already bubbling over. He was supposed to pay us. He promised. Then he turned on me, said I was weak. Lydia, said Agatha carefully, you don't need to... He deserved it, she shrieked. They all deserved it. Elaine tried to grab her arm. Lydia jerked away, stumbling. The bottle slipped, then she snatched it back, eyes wild. Don't, cried Bill. It could be... But too late. Lydia raised the bottle to her lips, drinking defiantly. Within seconds her body stiffened, her eyes widened in shock. She made a choking sound, collapsed onto the wet grass, and lay still. For a moment, no one moved. Only the fog drifted between them, soft and terrible. Then Agatha whispered, Oh, good Lord. Bill knelt beside Lydia, checked her pulse, then shook his head. Gone, Charles exhaled. That's dramatic. Shut up, Charles, said Agatha sharply. Elaine had sunk to her knees, staring at Lydia's body. She wanted to frighten you, she murmured. Not kill herself. What are you talking about? Elaine looked up, tears streaming. She told me earlier she'd make you confess. Said she'd bring the tonic to scare you. She'd used it before, on Martin, and thought she could control it. She never believed she'd be the one to drink it. Agatha's stomach twisted. So she used the same bottle that killed Martin? Bill nodded grimly. Digitalis again, most likely. Must have been the leftover batch. Serves me right for turning up alone, Agatha muttered. Don't, said Bill quietly. You couldn't have known. I should have, she said. I always think I'm invincible, till someone proves otherwise. Charles placed a hand on her shoulder. You're still standing. That's something. Yes, said Agatha, but my heels aren't. The remark broke the tension, just enough for Bill to exhale and call in the report on his radio. The fog thickened again, as though eager to erase the evidence. By dawn, the drama was over. The police cars had gone, the body taken, statements given. Agatha walked home through the thinning mist, Charles beside her. The first light turned the cottages pale gold. So it was Lydia all along, Charles said. Yes, said Agatha, but not quite the way we thought. Poetic, really, he mused. Killed by her own poison. Nothing poetic about Foxglove, Agatha said. Just stupidity and pride. You'd know. She gave him a sidelong glare. You're a comfort, as always. Well, someone has to puncture your melodrama. Consider it punctured. They reached her gate. Hodge was sitting in the window, tail flicking disapproval. Charles smiled. See? Even the cat's judging you. He's consistent, she said. Unlike my friends. You'd be bored without us. True, she admitted. Now go home before I find something sharp. He saluted lazily and departed, his engine coughing into the distance. Inside, the cottage felt blessedly normal. Kettle, clock, faint smell of toast. Ordinary life reclaiming its territory. Agatha poured herself a cup of tea, then promptly replaced it with gin. She sat by the fire, Hodge curling up on her lap. For a long while she stared into the flames. Martin Weller, a charming fraud. Lydia, a desperate fool. Elaine, a liar clinging to survival. And herself, what was she? A middle-aged idiot with delusions of grandeur, she muttered. Hodge purred, unimpressed. Oh, hush, she said. You're no saint either. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, the church bell rang again, softer now, almost forgiving. Agatha lit a cigarette, drew the smoke deep, and smiled faintly through the haze. Well, Hodge, she said, another night, another corpse. Perhaps next time I'll stay out of it. He yawned. Yes, she said, we both know I'm lying. She leaned back, exhaled toward the ceiling, and watched the smoke curl upward like one last whisper of fog over Carsely Green. The morning after Lydia's death dawned too bright for decency. Carsely looked washed and innocent, all honeystone respectability and misty hedgerows, as if the village had never heard of poison, scandal, or bad taste in men. Agatha Raisin stood in her kitchen, glaring at the kettle as though it were personally responsible for the hangover behind her eyes. Hodge, curled on the table, blinked at her with feline reproach. Don't start, she muttered. I survived attempted murder, police interrogation and public humiliation. I'm entitled to gin before breakfast. The kettle clicked. She poured tea instead. One had to maintain appearances even when alone. The phone rang. Agatha Raisin, she said with a crispness that fooled no one. You sound perky, said Bill Wong's steady voice. You might want to stay that way. I've got news. Is it flattering? Not particularly, but it's closure. Then come over. Bring buns. I'm out of patience and carbohydrates. Half an hour later, Bill arrived with a brown paper bag and his usual calm. He looked far too neat for a man who'd been up all night writing reports. You police types, said Agatha, handing him a mug. Always so smug when it's over. You probably think I'll apologize. I wouldn't risk disappointment, he said mildly, taking a seat. So, what's the official word? Bill opened a folder. It's a proper tangle. Martin and Lydia were running the fake charity, Helping Hands, for at least a year. They forged checks in Elaine's name. She signed some willingly, some not. When Martin tried to cut Lydia out, she panicked, added digitalis to his tonic during one of their business meetings. Romantic in a revolting way, said Agatha. After he died, Lydia tried to destroy the evidence, checks, letters, all of it. But when we checked her cottage, we found burned fragments in the fireplace. One still had your name on it. Agatha stiffened. Mine? Yes. Apparently Martin had drawn up a new donation receipt, meant to implicate you if things went wrong. The rat. Indeed. Lydia probably realized what it meant. That's why she wanted to meet you. She was desperate to prove she wasn't the only guilty one. Agatha set down her cup. So she killed him to stop a blackmailer, and then killed herself by accident trying to frighten me. Essentially. How very Cotswold, said Agatha. Bill allowed himself a small smile. You did notice something we missed. The missing keys. That helped us track the sequence. You were right. Martin's body was moved post-mortem. Agatha felt a flicker of satisfaction. Then I expect a commendation. You'll be lucky to avoid another headline, Bill said dryly. The press have declared you the woman men die for. Oh, marvellous, she said. Do they at least mention my figure? Only your temper. Idiots. I've half a mind to sue. That would make it worse. It usually does, she said, lighting a cigarette. Roy Silver arrived unannounced as usual, carrying flowers and drama. My poor, tragic darling, he cried, sweeping into the room. You look fabulous in disgrace. You're early, said Agatha. The Vulture Convention isn't till noon. Hush, I'm writing a column. Cupid's Corpse, Love and Lies in the Cotswolds. It'll be tasteful. Then it's not your work, said Bill. Roy sniffed. Public curiosity must be fed. You, my dear Aggie, are the souffle of scandal. You're the gas, she muttered. Anyway, Roy went on, undeterred, I've portrayed you as a misunderstood romantic. Brave, bruised, beautiful. Tragic heroine of modern womanhood. Could you possibly sound more revolting? Probably, said Roy cheerfully. Bill, darling, is it true she chased a murderer in heels? True, said Bill. And mud. Oh, sensational. Roy clasped his hands. Can I quote you both? No, they said together. Fine. I'll use artistic license. Roy, said Agatha, kindly remove your artistic license from my house before I burn it. Very well, but you'll thank me when you're famous again for the right reasons. There are no right reasons, she said. Roy kissed her cheek, whispered, Keep suffering, darling. It sells beautifully, and flitted out. Bill shook his head. You choose the strangest friends. They're all that's available, she said. By afternoon, the village had resumed its favourite occupation, gossip disguised as compassion. At the Red Lion, Doris Simpson was holding court, insisting she'd known all along that those Wellers were a bad lot. Agatha entered to polite silence, the pause reserved for celebrities and suspects. Afternoon, she said, chin high. Any poison in the sherry today, Doris? A few nervous titters. No, Mrs. Raisin, Doris said stiffly. Just lemon slices. Fresh ones. Good. I prefer my murder metaphors subtle. Charles Fraith was already at the bar, his convertible parked scandalously across two spaces. He raised his glass. To survival, he said. Barely, said Agatha, joining him. You must admit, Aggie, you do make life interesting. I'd settle for dull and solvent, she said, lighting another cigarette. Nonsense, you'd hate it. Admit it. You thrive on trouble. It's not an allotment vegetable, Charles. I don't cultivate it. He smiled. You attract it, then, like perfume. Cheap comment, she said, though she smiled despite herself. They clinked glasses. Bill tells me you helped untangle the mess, Charles said. He's impressed, in his quiet, constipated way. Agatha felt absurdly pleased. He should be. I saw what no one else did. The vanity of detection, Charles teased. The reward of accuracy, she retorted. Ah, Aggie, he said, amused, unromantic as ever. After recent experience, I consider that progress. Back at the cottage, dusk fell with the familiar hush of drizzle. Agatha fed Hodge, who received the gesture as his due, then poured herself a sensible measure of gin. The newspaper lay on the table. Her own face looked up from it, stern, slightly unflattering, surrounded by bold print. Cotswold Sleuth clears name in charity poisoning. She snorted. They make it sound like a fundraiser. Mrs. Bloxby arrived just then, her umbrella dripping politely on the doorstep. I thought you might prefer my company to the headlines, she said. Bless you, Bloxby. You're the only person in Carsely who doesn't enjoy my disasters. I wouldn't say that, said Mrs. Bloxby, hanging her coat. They do keep things lively. Agatha laughed, a short, surprised bark. Sit down before I take offence. Mrs. Bloxby poured herself tea while Agatha clung to her gin. Bill told me everything, the vicar's wife said. I'm glad it's over. Over is a strong word, said Agatha. The press will dine on this till Christmas. Let them. The truth is clear. Yes, said Agatha. Unromantic but clear. Mrs. Bloxby studied her kindly. You're not disappointed, are you? In what? That it wasn't something grander. Love, betrayal, tragedy. It was only greed and fear. Agatha hesitated. Maybe a little. I suppose I liked thinking I'd been caught up in something passionate. You were, said Mrs. Bloxby gently. just not in the way you hoped. Agatha sighed. You always manage to make moral sense out of other people's messes. Occupational hazard, said Mrs. Bloxby. She reached over, touching Agatha's hand. Perhaps next time you should consider saying no before yes. Agatha arched an eyebrow. To men or murder? Either would be a start. Agatha smiled despite herself. You're wasted on the clergy. And you, said Mrs. Bloxby, rising to leave, are wasted on scandal. After she'd gone, the cottage grew quiet again. Hodge stretched luxuriously on the armchair, blinking at his mistress with mild contempt. Agatha refilled her glass and leaned against the window, watching the rain fall over Carsely Green. The church stood outlined in silver mist, serene as if no midnight tragedies had ever touched it. You know, Hodge, she said, it's a funny thing. I set out to prove I wasn't a fool and ended up proving I'm merely human. He meowed, unimpressed. Exactly, she said. Even you've higher standards. She stubbed out her cigarette, smiling faintly. Still, she said, I did solve it. I saw the pattern when others didn't. Not bad for an aging advertising executive in muddy heels. The cat yawned. Fine, she said. No applause necessary. She turned off the light, the room falling into gentle shadow. The rain whispered against the windows, the sound soft as absolution. As she climbed the stairs, she paused to glance back. The newspaper headline gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Cotswold sleuth clears name. Agatha shook her head. They'll never learn. Neither will I. Hodge blinked once, then settled deeper into his chair, the picture of indifference. Good night, you heartless beast, she said fondly. She closed the door behind her, leaving the cottage quiet, the faint scent of gin and cigarette smoke drifting like a signature, sharp, stubborn, and unmistakably Agatha Raisin. The Cotswold sky had turned its usual evening shade of stubborn grey. A faint drizzle pattered against the cottage windows, soft enough to sound almost forgiving. Inside, the fire burned with slow confidence, throwing a warm glow across the sitting room. Agatha Raisin sat in her armchair, Hodge curled luxuriously on her lap, a glass of gin untouched beside her. It was, she thought sourly, the first time gin had failed to improve a day. The cottage smelled faintly of wood smoke, lavender polish, and defeat. You'd think, she muttered to Hodge, that at my age I'd know better than to trust a man with dimples. Hodge purred, which she chose to interpret as agreement. He wasn't even handsome, she went on, just confident, and confidence in a man is like catnip for idiots. The cat stretched one paw over her arm, claws slightly out, a feline reminder to stop fidgeting. Agatha sighed. Fine, fine, I'll shut up. She tried the gin at last. It tasted flat, like an apology served too late. Outside, Carsely went on with its favourite pastime, gossip disguised as community spirit. Lights glowed in cottage windows, curtains twitched like nervous eyelids. Somewhere down the lane, Doris Simpson's voice could be heard in vigorous recounting. By morning, Agatha knew the village would have edited her near murder into a sort of comic opera. Poor Agatha, they'd say, always in the thick of it. They'd say it with sympathy laced in honeyed spite, the way country folk perfected over centuries. She'd once dreamed of being admired here, respected, even loved. Instead, she had become Carsley's ongoing serial drama, a widow with expensive hair and bad luck in men. Still, she thought grimly, better notorious than invisible. The doorbell rang. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said, shifting Hodge onto the cushion. If that's Roy with another bouquet, I'll feed him to the compost heap. It wasn't Roy. Mrs. Bloxby stood on the doorstep, haloed in drizzle, holding a basket and wearing her customary expression of calm benevolence. May I come in? She asked, as though Agatha had ever dared say no. If you must, said Agatha, stepping aside. I brought scones, Mrs. Bloxby said, setting the basket on the table. Fresh ones. I thought you might not have eaten properly. I've had crisps, said Agatha. Ah, a balanced diet, then. Mrs. Bloxby's tone was mild, but Agatha caught the glint of amusement. You're enjoying this, Agatha accused. Only a little, Mrs. Bloxby admitted, removing her coat. You're safe, the truth is out, and no one in Carsely has died for a whole day. It's practically peace on earth. Agatha snorted. Doris Simpson's probably telling the WI I lured Martin Weller to his doom with seductive sponge cake. She did mention cake, said Mrs. Bloxby. Agatha rolled her eyes. Of course she did. I should start charging royalties. You'll find, said Mrs. Bloxby, buttering a scone, that gossip fades faster when ignored. I've never been good at ignoring anything, said Agatha, lighting a cigarette, especially when it's about me. You do have that gift, Mrs. Bloxby agreed gently. Agatha laughed, a small, genuine sound. The tension in her shoulders eased a fraction. For a while they sat in companionable quiet, Mrs. Bloxby eating, Agatha smoking, the fire muttering softly. You know, said Mrs. Bloxby, I admire your courage. You mean my stupidity? No, you face things head-on, even when they frighten you. Nonsense, I'm just too stubborn to hide. It's a kind of bravery. Agatha eyed her suspiciously. You're being kind because you think I'm fragile. Not at all, said Mrs. Bloxby. I'm being kind because you deserve it, occasionally. Agatha considered this, then muttered, Well, don't make a habit of it. I'll get sentimental. Perish the thought, said Mrs. Bloxby. When the clock chimed 9, Mrs. Bloxby rose to leave. You'll be all right? She asked. Of course I will, said Agatha. I always am. Good. And Agatha? Yes? Perhaps. Next time, say no before yes. Agatha smiled faintly. You sound like my conscience. Someone has to. The vicar's wife gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder, then disappeared into the misty lane. Agatha closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling smoke and a sigh. Say no before yes, she murmured. Easy for her to say. She's married to a man who quotes Corinthians instead of lying about charity checks. She returned to the fire where Hodge had reclaimed the best seat, her own. You'd have made a better husband than any of them, she told him. Less conversation, fewer surprises. Hodge yawned, entirely in agreement. The flames had sunk low, flickering against the grate like sleepy gossipers. Agatha topped up her gin, then didn't drink it. For once, quiet felt pleasant rather than accusing. Her thoughts drifted, not to Martin or Lydia or the mess of deceit, but to something smaller and steadier. The absurd comfort of Mrs. Bloxby's presence, the forgiving weight of Hodge on her knees, the soft tap of drizzle on the window. She had been made a fool again, yes, but she was still standing. Carsely would laugh, the papers would sneer, and she'd go on exactly as before. Lipstick temper, curiosity intact. Romance, she muttered, lighting another cigarette, should carry a government health warning. Hodge blinked at her through the smoke. Don't look so smug, she said. You've never fallen for a man who said, trust me. He stretched lazily, one paw extended toward the fading fire. Agatha smiled, small and wry. Ah, well, she said, common sense isn't glamorous, but it keeps the heart beating. She reached for the gin, took one careful sip, and set it aside again. Outside, the drizzle softened to mist. The village lights dimmed, and Carsely, ever watchful, ever talkative, settled into silence. Agatha leaned back in her chair, cigarette glowing faintly in the dark, while Hodge purred on, untroubled by romance, reputation, or regret. Sleep tight, you sensible creature, she said softly. Tomorrow we start fresh. No men, no mysteries, no nonsense. The cat's tail flicked once. Yes, yes, she murmured, smiling to herself. I'm lying again. The fire crackled, the smoke curled upward, and for once Agatha Raisin allowed herself to feel something close to peace, not perfect, but hers.